Hey, welcome back to the Brownie Points podcast. I'm your host, Noam, with my co-host,
Levi.
You always do so great with that. First segment, we're going to talk about whatever happened over there, like who's to blame, because some people talk about units, like the offensive line. Some people are blaming specific people, like Kevin Stefanski, like Deshaun Watson. So we're going to get into that and who we think is actually to blame and what's really going on. Then we're going to talk about the defense. Are they even a good defense anymore? What's going on with that? Then we're going to talk about the Brownie Point segment, which is where we award brownie points to the standout performers on offense, to the standout performers on defense, which will be admittedly a short segment this week. And then we're, of course, going to finish up with our look-ahead segment, Browns versus the Raiders, previewing that game, and we'll give you our score predictions as well. Levi, kick us off here with that first segment. Who's to blame? Is it a unit? Is it a specific person? Is it a collective effort? What's going on?
Yeah, and that's certainly interesting going into this. I will say, as much as I've criticized Deshaun, I didn't come into this post-watching the game feeling, hey, this is really a Deshaun Watson blame game. You know, we can't always have the conversation at all times based on the amount of money that we paid and the picks we gave up to get him. That's all part of the conversation, obviously, but on a week-to-week basis, at a certain point, you just need to evaluate what's in front of you, what you can do and what you can't, and that's just the way it is. And those are two separate conversations, attaching the resources that went into having him in terms of keeping him and trading for him and
Right.
his performance and what you can get out of him. And yes, obviously you would like a $230 million quarterback to play with lesser talent and be able to operate all the offenses and do everything you'd like. However, you know, he hasn't been able to do that, which is a little disappointing. But at the same time, I didn't feel like he was worse than he was last week. I watched him. I felt very similar to me. It felt more like everybody else around him not doing as well as why his performance overall wasn't as good. But it didn't feel that different. You know, I do think Stefanski does deserve some blame because I thought the adjustments waited till halftime. And yeah, you could have made some of those adjustments earlier, especially because they felt like adjustments that were made last week that didn't come over to the beginning of the game this week, which is the shorter game, that quicker game. Some of those underneath throws, they were clearly there in the first half, and they seemed to wait till the second half to make that adjustment. So yeah, and again, that is one of the things we talk about. As good as Stefanski has become a better play caller, but the one advantage of having a play caller, offensive coordinator, is that when you have a good one, they can make quicker adjustments because they don't have to watch the defense. They don't have to do challenges. They don't have to monitor the whole team. And so sometimes there are that additional advantage in having that guy. But is what it is. Stefanski is a good play caller. And so we can get into that. But ultimately, when you have a guy who's a good play caller, that's the guy you're sticking with. Because, you know, you take a shot and you might end up with someone much worse. However, there was that side to it, and I did think some of those things weren't just based on the opponent. They were things that clearly Sean was doing better before. I would have liked to have seen a little more of that in the first half, and having some offense in the first half would have been nice, right? Because the only reason we got a touchdown was due to recovering the kick.
Right.
And then getting that one play touchdown. Like, that's great, but that's not real offense. Besides for that, they didn't run a play in the opponent's territory the entire first half. That's not offense. You know, you needed an offense. If you had that and had more time in possession, you know, you don't end up with the Giants scoring at the end of the first half, right? The last minute touchdown that played such a vital role in the end of it. So Stefanski deserves some blame. The offensive line was definitely terrible. You know, obviously Watson missed some plays. He does have a habit of missing guys that are open and then running around a lot. When you look back at the tape, he is missing guys. And, you know, I don't want to get too far into that because you really do have to analyze before you make that on which plays are which. Because sometimes I do see people yell about this guy's open, but then you see like the read starts on one side of the field, and at that time someone else is open on the other side of the field, and then they have to move because of pressure. It's like, well, you know, you can't start where someone's open. You have to start where the play starts. You can't always figure out where someone's open on the field somewhere. You have to start your reads where you start your reads. But it's been a long time with him, and we've seen this several times. It's not new. He did miss guys, but he wasn't spectacularly terrible either. He actually had some good moments. His arm looks to be pretty fine, doing a lot better, certainly. Mm-hmm. He's got a little zip back. It's more about the processing that you worry about, and sometimes think he's a little Superman and some of his athleticism, which I think he has lost a touch of it, and he's getting caught a little bit more. He's still got great athleticism, but he gets caught a little more than he used to. And so, yeah, it's really more of a team effort. But if I was going to blame one person, it would be Andrew Berry. I would blame Andrew Berry because, number one...
That's a name I haven't heard brought up really in this discussion. I really primarily just hear Kevin Stefanski, Deshaun Watson, or the offensive line.
Yeah, and a lot of people give him a pass on a lot of things, but I think he does deserve quite a bit of blame in some spots. And I think it deserves several reasons. Number one, we could talk about with Deshaun, some people do think the owner was involved. I do believe he's heavily involved, but...
He had to have been involved because you don't... you don't get the authorization to sign off on a contract
Well,
like that
yeah.
fully guaranteed
question is if he
without the
pushed it.
owner pushing for it.
The question is, did he push it really hard, and that's why?
Right. We don't know
that.
if Jimmy Haslam came to Andrew Berry or if Andrew Berry went to Jimmy Haslam.
But at this moment, all we have is what we have. And ultimately, he did make that move and paid him. But also, he decided to re-sign Conklin when we knew that Conklin was getting injured all the time, and he re-signed him to a huge contract, which took away his roster spots, took away money that could have been used on depth, right? So, like, we haven't even used him. You could have signed somebody else. He's also getting paid a lot of money. So you could have used that on a couple solid depth pieces.
It was a surprising move. I remember it was
very strange.
puzzling because I was thinking that the Browns were excited and to get out of his contract finally, not because he's bad or anything. Obviously, he never plays, right?
And they still did,
Right.
and that could have been two solid depth pieces. So and then on the other hand, he drafted Jedrick Wills, which you missed. That's not great, but he also kept sticking with him and isn't really invested in at least a solid backup option behind him. So it's like at a certain point, your lack of foresight is your problem. You get some opportunity to miss, but the fact that you haven't adjusted for those misses is a big problem.
Yeah, making mistakes isn't as big of an issue as it is not admitting your
Compounding on
mistakes,
them.
right?
Compounding
And not
your
admitting
mistakes.
and adjusting to your mistakes.
Right, because he's done other good things. He drafted DeJuan Jones. If you would have let Conklin go, now you draft DeJuan Jones. Look at you, you're the hero.
Right.
It is what it is, but ultimately, due to all that, he does deserve blame for the way this line has turned out. There's quite a bit of it because he didn't adjust to his mistakes. So for those reasons, and yeah, look, I mean, we could talk about the run game, how much of it were guys he could have gotten or not. You also have Chubb coming back. I won't give him too much on that end, but ultimately with the quarterback situation and the line, and again, those very avoidable mistakes in terms of the way he had plenty of time to not make those mistakes when you could see it's a mistake and then not making that adjustment to fix that mistake in your left tackle and right tackle position, he deserves a lot of blame.
Well, it does feel like throughout his time here that he's always been a little sticky with the guys that he drafts, right? Like when they don't turn out, he does seem to have a difficult time letting them go. Not that he never does, but Andrew does seem to have a difficult time doing that. So,
And look, 1 year is one thing, but after a few years, at some point, that's the thing in the NFL. I don't always think it's the most talented coaches and GMs who have the success. It's the guys who can recognize mistakes and learn from them quickly that are often the people that have the most success, because you'll see it in guys like very famously John Harbaugh of the Ravens for so many years. Just he understands talent, he recognizes talent in his coordinators and his coaches, knows when he's wrong, makes the adjustments, and his teams do well. And you'll see it with GMs and everything. It's about recognizing when this guy isn't working out and moving on to the next.
yeah, absolutely. Because the drafts, just by dumb luck, will gift you guys, right? I mean, you don't have to be a genius to ever end up with guys who are good, and doesn't mean that you're bad if you end up with busts, right? Every single GM drafts a bust and draft multiple busts over the course of their career. Not even technically every year usually, because like of your first 3 rounds, you expect something out of them. Like one of them is gonna severely miss expectations. Like it's just difficult to draft. There's so many factors that can lead a college player to not translate to the NFL. It's okay to make the mistakes as long as they're paired obviously with successes, but it's okay to make the mistakes. But like you're saying, when you don't adjust to them and recognize them, now you're really in trouble. And Jedrick Wills, it feels like, yeah, it's too late. Like we're sitting in the offseason, there's this whole discussion about whether to re-sign him, whether to give him that option. And, people were trying to say, oh, you have to re-sign him because like there's not that many left tackles out there. You're kind of, those guys that are like, they're just past this point of like average. And so you feel like you just have to give them whatever because on the open market, somebody else will give them just because they're so hard to come by. So it felt like that's what the position they felt like they were in, but I don't think that was really true. And it was interesting because I remember hearing a discussion about Jedrick Wills, and somebody was saying that, Jedrick Wills, the tough thing about him, one of the reasons why they're probably investing is because you feel like you still haven't gotten the most out of him yet, right? Because he has a tendency to kind of give up on plays sometimes, maybe doesn't follow all the way through. And then somebody said, what if Bill Callahan did get the best out of Jedrick Wills? What if that was the best? That's not a great thing to think about. But it's just interesting, all of this discussion with these offensive linemen and the decisions that he made, because, yeah, like you said, re-signing Chaya Conklin, not a great move. Re-signing Jedrick Wills, probably not the right move, but drafting DeJuan Jones, that worked out nicely. Pochich has been a nice pickup. There were good decisions on there. Just if you'd moved on from the bad ones, we actually might still be in a decent spot.
You never know. Maybe you swap back. put Dewan back at left tackle, and he's got his own injury issue, so maybe that's not the right answer. But if you can get someone for left tackle, maybe Jed Wills can come back and play right. He played right in college. Not everybody can make the swap. Some people, there's a reason why they're playing right tackle.
Isn't it weird that they haven't tried that?
I think it's very strange.
Considering how he had all of his success at right tackle, and they said, okay, let's flip him to left. There's an understanding. Everybody knows that not everybody can just flip right to left. Some guys can. Their brains work like that, but some people they don't, and to them it's almost like another position. How come they haven't tried flipping him to right tackle, especially considering our right tackle Jack Conklin is usually injured? It's not like there haven't been opportunities to throw him in there and see what happens, right? During practice and whatever. It seems odd. Try it now. He's not working a left tackle.
Like
he's not working a left tackle.
You drafted a left tackle at top 10, and now you don't want to move.
Right.
You might want to admit that he's really a right tackle.
But that goes back to what we were saying about admitting the mistakes. Saying, look, Jedrick Wills was a mistake, especially at least at left tackle. Move him over to right tackle. Maybe it will work.
Maybe you salvage out a great right tackle.
Maybe you salvage out, or at least a middling right tackle, because right now he's bad as a left tackle.
But also he's got injuries too.
Yes.
We need to move on from all these guys who are always injured. If you have someone who's always injured, at a certain point, you're not worth much at all because you're just not there.
Yeah.
And even DeJuan Jones, who I like, he's having injury issues. The second year in a row.
Or at least offer a smaller contract and bring that to the table. Be like, hey, look, you got a lot of injuries. What if we did a 2-year, $14 million deal or something like that? And then if you do well over those 2 years, you don't get injured, then okay, we'll talk about coming back to the table at a high rate.
Yeah, a certain amount. We have a certain amount of names that are good, but also when they're all injury prone, you get down to your bottom very quickly.
Yes, and the Browns have been doing that with their offensive line. Now, I haven't looked at the data. Sometimes when it's your team, you feel like, all the injuries, woe is me, and then you step out and really your injuries are actually about on par with the league. So I haven't looked into that far. I don't know, but I do know that it certainly feels like the Browns have had an abnormal amount of offensive line injuries. Yes.
Yeah, offensive line injuries year after year, the same guys year after year.
Yeah.
That, I think, has been high level.
Jack Conklin's played 3 quarters in his career here, it feels like.
And Jed Wills, he really hasn't been healthy since his rookie year. He's always been missing a large amount of games every year.
Yeah. So, but let's wrap that up there.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about the defense. The defense is supposed to be the strong point of this team, so much to the point that we were saying that Deshaun Watson only needs to be a bridge quarterback for this team to make the playoffs, right? This is something we've seen in the NFL before. An elite defense with a bridge quarterback, you can make the playoffs. You win 9 to 10 games, right? Are they an elite defense?
At times, yes, but overall, I don't think they are anymore. I do think they're a good defense. I don't think they're a great defense. I think they have moments of greatness, but overall, they're a good to very good defense, but not an elite defense. That is not unusual, actually. As much as defenses can be kind of like closers. Year to year, you never know. And it's weird. Sometimes they just don't always click year to year, and you don't always know why. It doesn't always make sense. One team right now, whose defense took a huge drop is the Cowboys. It's a big drop. And that's not the only one. Every year, there's defenses that just kind of drop off. It's kind of hard to tell sometimes. They're not huge drop-offs. They're not bad. But they definitely made their mistakes. And I do think that there's a little bit of an issue with our coordinator, too.
Jim Schwartz. Why?
Jim Schwartz, yeah. And you saw this actually at the playoffs last year. So he's a great coordinator to get the most out of players as individuals. He's a great guy to get everybody motivated and playing the way he wants to. But we're entering an increasingly complicated scheme area of the NFL. And you're seeing that a lot of defenses are playing phenomenal now. You've got a bunch of defenses that are playing much better than they ever have. And you're seeing guys like Flores and Mike McDaniels just killing it with these brilliant schemes. And Schwartz feels like a previous era defensive coordinator. He's not bad. He's a good defensive coordinator. But his adjustments are slow. I don't feel like he plays the chess game as well as you'd like. Mm-hmm. And a good example was the playoff game, right? They were not ready for the fact that Nico Collins was the only one, right? They didn't want to do. And this seems weird. It's like deja vu. They have one good receiver, and you don't know what to do. Well, guess what? Same thing happened the first half of this game.
Yeah.
One good receiver. You have one great corner. Everyone else says, hey, one great receiver. We have a phenomenal corner. We're going to put our eraser on him or double team. Instead, they're like, oh, we're going to do what we're going to do. And you know what happened? You end up with Emerson one-on-one with Neighbors a few times, and it got destroyed in the first half. Second half, they decided to go to Ward, and Ward shuts him down. Which on one hand, you're encouraged that they give up no points in the first half. On the other hand, you're thinking, was it really so complicated to think that Ward should trail their only really, really phenomenal receiver?
Yeah. It doesn't make any sense. That's the whole value of having a lockdown corner that you could put him on an island and erase somebody is to put him on an island and erase somebody, and then you could just worry about everybody else and double up You put 1-on-1 on the number 1 and then double the number 2 and then they gotta make the number 3 beat you. Like, it's like the whole value of having that guy. Why aren't you doing that? I don't know. Maybe they didn't think Milligan Neighbors was gonna do that. But in general, I think I agree. Yeah, I think I just agree with your take on it that Jim Schwartz is just a little bit slow schematically. I think his whole thing is that I think he likes to simplify things to some degree, right? I mean, he likes doing blitzes. I'm not, you know what I mean? But like, I think he likes to have his identity. And he likes to infuse that identity into the players and motivate them. But part of that, I think, is keeping it relatively simple, like doing the same scheme game to game, even regular season to playoffs against the exact same opponent. He doesn't want to change it up. He wants to keep the same, like, we're going to come in, we're going to do this, this is our identity, we play this way, and they're going to adjust to us. But the reality is that doesn't always happen. When you have an overwhelming abundance of talent, there are teams that I can recall that have been able to play that kind of game, where they do what they want to do every game and everybody else ends up having to adjust them because they're just so ridiculously talented. This is not that team, right? You have, which is basically no teams. We're talking about like a handful have been able to do that. Generally speaking, you have to, exactly. Generally speaking, you have to make your adjustments. It does feel like he just is hesitant to do that. I think he just likes having this identity with the team that, like, this is what we do. The guys come in every single week knowing what they do and how they're going to play. And it has benefits, but it has its downsides, and I think we see its downsides, and we also see its benefits, right? I think that's partly why we saw such a big up and down last year, home versus away.
And the only guys who really do that are McDaniels and Flores. The two guys who are carrying over year over year, like last year was phenomenal. McDaniels with the Ravens, and Flores still with the Vikings, and doing so great. But you know what? You know what they do? They're super complicated. It's not that they just come in there and play a style. It's that they do so many complicated looks that teams have trouble adjusting to them. So that's why they're able to do what they do. They don't just take anyone with any skill set. Very few teams have people that are that talented all over the field that they can just be like, oh, well, whatever happens, happens. Because we've seen that Emerson doesn't do well with quick guys. He's built for playing the Falcons. Why? Because you can stick him on Drake London. He sticks on the big physical receiver. Great with the big physical guy. He's not real good with the speedsters, great route runner. He doesn't.
That's why he should never really. He really generally shouldn't be on. I think
especially on an island.
I feel like I recall him handling the number 1 at times for moments, for like brief moments and plays. But generally speaking, like, that's not what he's there for. I don't feel like they drafted him even to be the number 1 corner, right? Like, that's why you have Denzel Ward. That's what you drafted him for, right? Put him on the number 1. Let everybody else worry about their assignments after that. Double up and take advantage, but I don't know. It's confusing.
And also, we'll have to see how long Myles Garrett's injured for.
Yeah, I mean, we're just gonna have to wait and see.
Because that could be,
if he's out,
that could be defense. That could be.
Yeah, and you know what?
I don't want to be super pessimistic, but it could even be season over. Because if he's out for even 5 or 6 weeks, and this defense just can't take it anymore. I don't want to.
I mean, it could be
super
because
pessimistic, but I don't see this offense really being able to carry the team.
Because it's going to have a lot of ripple effects, right? I mean, because obviously he draws double teams and triple teams on occasion, but he draws very regular double teams. I think he was the second most double teamed guy in the league last year.
Yeah.
If not number 1, or top 3 at least, for sure. That obviously helps everybody else, puts everyone else in one-on-one situations much more often. It's possible somebody will step up, and it turns out they can handle that anyways, but fill that void. But if Myles Garrett goes out, you do kind of feel like the season might be over, because if the defense isn't going to be elite, the offense certainly isn't elite anymore. Not anymore, but the offense certainly isn't elite. If the defense isn't going to be elite anymore, then the season probably is over. I will say, like, on that note of, if Myles Garrett goes out, how does that affect the defense? Kind of flipping that, Nick Chubb coming back could transform this offense. His threat and his ability to run the ball, but also as a galvanizing motivational force, as like, all right, Nick Chubb is back. And kind of give everybody a reset and renewed hope that they can get this thing back on track with Nick Chubb in that backfield. So there's something to talk about there. We'll just have to wait and see. But
the defense still has to be pretty good.
The defense still has to be pretty good. Yes.
You know what I mean? Like, he can be a stabilizing force, like, to help you get a few more points in the offense. And, like, for this half of having gotten you to field goal range a few times. But at the same time, if the defense is really falling apart, he's not going to suddenly, take your offense to a whole new level. So, while the offensive line's going down and your defense is just giving up lots of points, he's not going to turn you into a juggernaut, is my point.
Exactly. All right. Let's talk about the brownie points for this game. Not a whole lot of highlights. What do you want to give to your brownie points? Again, if you're a first-time listener, brownie point segment is where we give brownie points, 3, 2, and 1 brownie point to stand-up players on offense and to stand-up players on defense. That it's no guarantees anybody gets brownie points. We give it out based on what makes the most sense, game to game, a case-by-case basis. From this game, does anybody in your mind deserve brownie points on the offense?
Yeah, so interestingly, I think each side had one really standout star, and then everybody else was just not great.
Meh.
Varying levels from meh to terrible, but there just wasn't a lot of standouts. On offense, Amari Cooper, big bounce back game, and that is the one really bright spot because he really struggled those first 2 weeks.
And so we talked about last week, we said, hey, we're not going to talk about the Amari Cooper situation because I think it's a non-story. He's a veteran. He's done too well for too long for us to start judging him after 2 games. Like, give him a little bit more time. We'll talk about him week 4 or 5, and look what happens.
7 grabs, 2 touchdowns.
Exactly.
And he looked great, and he was really the driving force of this offense. And so he looked great, and he was phenomenal. It was great to see him bounce back. Ford had a chance to until he fumbled. It was really critical down, and he fumbled. And as we were driving, maybe who knows to tie the game and maybe take the lead. They had done a 2-point conversion, so they could have taken the lead on an extra point.
Mm-hmm.
But then he fumbles, and he lost his opportunity at that point. And nobody else in the offense was great. The offensive line struggled, and Watson, like I said, wasn't all his fault, but he didn't earn a brownie.
Right.
And so at that point, I'm done with the offense.
How about the defense?
Defense, we were talking about him, Denzel Ward. He was given an assignment. Should he have been given it all game? Yes. But ultimately, they said, oh my God, Malik Neighbors, sorry. They said, oh my God, Malik Neighbors is killing us. Oh, he's good. What do you know? He was picked so high and did amazing last week. He's killing us. And they said, save us. And he did. Like, he completely shut down Neighbors in the second half. And their offense stalled out and didn't score another point. So he was phenomenal. Nobody else was really phenomenal. Some people had some good moments. JOK had good moments, but he also had some bad moments. And overall, there was that play where he went back-to-back where he had a tackle for a loss against Singletary, but then also whiffed in the flat. Total huge whiff. Didn't slow him down like we talk about having that discipline to slow someone down. Yeah. Just shot right at him, missed completely, and he got a big gain. They got him out of the when they were backed up behind the 10. And so ultimately, that's the only person I'm giving brownie points to.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I'm in agreement with you. Like, we don't need to hash this all out. It wasn't a great performance on offense. Defense wasn't terrible, but it doesn't mean that there were people worthy of brownie points. We really try to give it to the standouts, not to just who is technically the best. You have to actually be good in general, not just necessarily the best in the context of that game. Now, let's talk about our look ahead segment. Last week, didn't go as expected. Last week, can't say it went as expected either, but they did win, which we did hope for, although we thought they were going to lose based off what happened in week 1. It's been very up and down. What's happening this week coming up against the Raiders? What's your expectation for how the game's going to play out? And then, of course, what's your score prediction?
So this is definitely one of the hardest games to look at because the Raiders are one of the more inscrutable teams that have played so far this season.
How do you mean? Elaborate.
Yeah, I will. Absolutely. Thank you for the orders. But don't get me wrong, it's early season football. It's always hard to tell where teams are because there are teams that are good that you thought were good, and so you think there are good performances against them, but then they're bad. There are teams that are bad that you thought were going to be good, and so that changes it. There's also teams that are good, but then they just lay an egg. They just have a bad game, and so suddenly you think this team's really good, but then in a couple of weeks it becomes clear what happened. So there is that. But the Raiders are the most inconsistent, right? They played one tough game, but they lost to the Chargers, which is kind of what everyone expected of the Raiders this year. And then they come in and beat the Ravens, and that's a shocker. And then they just get whooped by the Panthers, and that's a shocker too. And don't get me wrong, Andy Dalton is better.
Yeah, it's obviously a different Panthers team with Dalton, but still.
But getting destroyed like that is a shocker.
Yeah.
So you're not really certain, and a lot of people thought they were going to have a really good defense coming to this year all the same, and the back-to-back weeks they've given up 30-plus points.
Yeah.
So that actually hasn't panned out so far. On the other hand, our offense doesn't look ready to take advantage of that. And on the other hand, our defense isn't quite where we like it to be. We're also dealing with Myles Garrett being injured. He may very well not be able to make it this week, and it will be on the road. It's really tough because it's hard to know which team is going to show up.
Mm-hmm.
But unfortunately, I do not have a good feeling about this week. It's definitely hard to rely on the Browns, and you never know where they might go week to week. But the Raiders are also angry. They just lost badly and got embarrassed. They're going to go play at home. They're going to be up for this game as well, not just the Browns. And it does feel like they do have some talent. They do have some identity. They do have some guys who know what they're doing. And we've just had a few too many injuries and I think a sinking feeling and a lack of faith in Watson from the team. And
the Raiders have a pretty good defensive line.
They do.
And the Browns' offensive line.
It's like Max Crosby's going to have himself a day.
Yeah, and as we know, games are often won and lost at the line of scrimmage. If the defense is going to terrorize that offensive line, the Browns aren't going to be able to run the ball. They're not going to be able to pass the ball. They're not going to be able to do what they want to do. And they don't do that well when they can do what they want to do. So it's not looking that great.
Feels like on the road, this one's going to be tough. I think it is going to be 24-17 24-14 Raiders.
I'm going with 2017 Raiders. I think it's going to be a tough loss. I think it's going to be tight. I think the defense is going to mostly hold together, keep it fairly tight to the end, but I just don't think the offense is going to be able to get enough going with the defensive line terrorizing whatever is left of our
Defensive touchdown for the Raiders.
That would not shock me, like a fumble, forcing
like,
a fumble,
I don't think they're
sacking
destroying
Deshaun Watson, the ball pops out kind of thing.
Or a setup at the 5.
Yeah.
Like, all but a defensive
I could imagine like Deshaun Watson also trying to play hero ball, getting run out, falling down to the ground, flinging it out into the middle of the field or something. But, we'll see what happens. But, yeah, that's my prediction. But you know what? Our predictions have been awful this year so far.
So hopefully it's awful again.
Yeah, exactly. Hopefully it's awful again. We'll talk about it next week when we get there, and hopefully we have good things to talk about finally. I'm tired of this.
Just a little note, we do the betting segment again. The lines now come out first earlier in the week, and then the props come out later in the week, so we do that as a short props and degenerate designation. And hey, this past week, I actually hit my degenerate designation. That's a plus 400 odds bet. That was the Vikings on a 3-leg parlay for the Vikings to win outright. CJ Stroud to have less than a 37.5 longest reception completion, and interception. So hit that one.
Yeah,
so
and that's like 3 bets within one, so it's like 1, but it's kind of like 3 bets.
Well, we often do a parlay in order to hit plus 400.
Yeah, that's I'm just
so keep an eye out for that.
Yeah, and again, if you just let people know, that's the betting segment this year. We're calling it Levi's Locks, and the goal is to turn $100 at the beginning of the year into $1,000 by the end of the year. If you want to know how that progress is going, it should be out within a couple days. Thank you for listening as always, and we'll see you next week.
See you next week.